Oh, hey, how's it going? Thomas Alex Norman here, and I have a coffee. I'm on my terrace in Barcelona, and we're going to be going into a really exciting video today about how to achieve cinematics with just a GoPro. Now the thing about GoPros is that they are typically renowned for making kind of fun little holiday videos, just kind of with your friends. They're very easy to use, very small, very kind of automatic, not too much manual control. They're also kind of renowned for action sports too, but kind of one angle, like putting it on somebody's head and just leaving it without much kind of creativity, just kind of capturing everything. And so I have a few questions from people saying, if I'm using my GoPro as my main camera, how can I achieve really cinematic footage? How can I get footage that is kind of more artistic, where I can get creative, where I can make the kind of films that I want to make that aren't just kind of fun little travel videos, and maybe something with a bit more meaning or a bit more creative depth to them? So in this video, we're going to be exploring how you can actually do that with a GoPro. It's a really interesting subject. We're going to kind of be pushing the limits of what we're doing on the GoPro to make it as artistic and to give you as much control as you possibly can. Now we're going to be using this camera as kind of the subject of this video, which is the new GoPro Hero 6. Well, I hope this still works. Which I am more than pumped about. This is awesome. I was actually invited out to Munich very recently with GoPro, and we went to Oktoberfest, had a bunch of fun, and they revealed their products. They revealed this, the Hero 6, and also the Fusion, which I'm really excited about too. But I got this and I thought it was just an incredible camera. I've been using it recently, and the stuff I've managed to kind of get with it just from the new settings, the new frame rates, which I'm going to be going into in a second, have been next level. I actually, before this, I had the Hero 4. So you actually had to like buy a screen to like put on the back of the Hero 4. It was all in a case, like if you wanted to attach it to almost anything. So you couldn't use the touchscreen inside the case. If you wanted to go in water, it was not waterproof unless you had the case on, which meant you couldn't get good sound. There's a bunch of kind of, they weren't issues, I guess, but they were just limitations that this just completely surpasses, and it just makes it, more than the image quality itself, it's just so easy to use. That's what I'm kind of more pumped about than anything. It's just, it's such a simple camera that can also do really powerful stuff. So make sure you stay to the end, because there's going to be an awesome little bonus tip right at the end for you guys waiting there. But first, let's go into the 5 main tips of how to achieve cinematic, artistic footage with just your GoPro. So good. Okay, so the first thing we're going to be getting into is the settings on this camera and what you can use to really achieve that cinematic, artistic look. One of the kind of the shortcuts to getting cinematic footage, or cinematic looking footage, which is in another way of saying cinematic, you can kind of say high production. So it looks like a lot of money has been spent on this shot or on this scene. Typically in movies, you'd say it has a very high production feel if like the image quality is absolutely crazy, if all the effects or everything look completely real, then you can kind of tell, wow, this has been like a lot of money has been spent on this film or on this video. So to achieve cinematic stuff, you kind of want to almost keep that in mind and think, you want people to think almost that you have a budget behind this video, and it's not just shot on a GoPro, it's not just shot on an iPhone. It looks like it's been shot on something much more serious. So a shortcut to doing that is by using slow-mo. And the reason for that is that until very recently, it was only really expensive cameras that could perform slow-mo and get up to 60, even 60 frames per second, or 120 or 240, or even beyond that. Now, with the release of this camera, you can get 240 frames per second at 1080p. And when we're talking about 240 frames per second, that is like the slow-mo that's really slow. That's not just kind of that creamy, nice slow motion feel. That's like almost like scientific slow motion, when things are like like the movie 300, when the people are killing each other and then they're going really fast and then it slows it down, so they're like this. 240 frames per second, you can achieve effects almost like that. So that's a pretty insane thing that you could put into your travel videos. Just by using that 240 frames per second, you're instantly going to achieve a much higher production value by using that slow-mo setting. Other settings on this camera is thinking about things like ProTune. ProTune allows all of your footage to be completely flat, so it's not really contrasty and already completely colored. This basically gives you more creative control in the post-production. So this allows you to give all of your footage a very consistent feel, which is also going to really add to that high production value. Next up is you could actually go to pretty crazy resolutions. You can shoot 4K at 60 frames per second with this as well. So what that basically means is that even if you're not putting a video on YouTube, for example, in 4K, you can put it in 1080p, but by using 4K, you can crop into any aspect of the frame you want to a pretty insane degree. You can crop into like kind of one corner of the frame and it will still look really high resolution. And that gives you a ton of control in the post-production as well, because it will allow you to do effects like scaling in and scaling out with keyframes, and also moving across left to right and right to left within your footage whilst things are happening too. And the ability to be able to do that in 60 frames per second, which is like a slow-mo, it's like half speed feel, then instantly that's a really cinematic look. Now this brings us nicely on to tip number 2, which basically states that you need to treat this like a big camera. And I talked about this in my iPhone video, how to make travel videos with your iPhone, fairly recently. It's probably been a little bit too long since I've made a video. But I'm going to play a clip really quickly right now of me saying almost exactly the same thing really fast right here. We kind of have this habit, whenever you have the phone in your hand, to start not really treating it like a high-end camera. You kind of see something you want to shoot, and then you're just kind of, you point it, try and get the shot. Yeah, got it, sweet, done. When you start treating this and almost pretending like this is a Red Dragon, or this is a Sony A7S II, then you're going to put so much more effort into your shots and you're going to really extract the potential out of your iPhone. So I totally agree with you, past Tom. It goes exactly the same with this GoPro here rather than just the iPhone. If you're viewing this like a big camera, then you're going to get those shots that you would get if you put more thought into them rather than just pointing them at stuff. You can go 4K 60 frames per second or 240 frames per second at 1080p and treat this camera just like a GoPro and kind of just hold it and wobble it around and just be like, oh, I want to film that, look at that. And it's going to always be the same kind of shitty effect, to be honest. But if you put thought into it as your basis, as your foundation, if you compose your shots, if you get the right movement, which we'll get into in a second, within your shots, then you're going to have a really good foundation that if you start adding these insane settings in the GoPro onto, that's when you get some really artistic, cinematic looking stuff. Up next is tip number 3. This is all about movement. And within this camera in specific, also the Hero 5 was pretty good at stabilization, but the Hero 6 is pretty ridiculous with the stabilization, is movement. And the ability to get really nice looking shots without actually stabilizing in post with this camera is insane. I would actually recommend whacking it on something like this, like a simple, it's basically just a really simple case with a stick on it, which is actually completely awesome in making your shots way more stable. So it's just this, it can extend, which is really cool, and it also can go out into a tripod, which is also dope. So it's a really versatile little tool. But more than anything, I'll use it just as a handle here. And just by kind of having a handle there, I'm going to film here, you can get really, really stable footage, much more stable than if you're holding it kind of here, because naturally your hand wobbles from side to side like that. But if you're here, a lot of that movement is taken out, so you can kind of go forwards and backwards with way more control. Now the stabilization within this camera is awesome. I was actually mountain biking kind of in Munich with the GoPro family, and I just put my GoPro right on the bars of the mountain bike and was kind of expecting footage to come back, because literally it was like this the whole time. And any old GoPro would have just got footage that was almost unusable for the whole thing, unless you had like some sort of weird gimbal setup. But this, the in-house stabilization, handled almost all of that for me. And when I was watching the footage, I was like, this is insane. The bike, I remember, was like this, and the footage came out pretty much like it was a drone. So that was awesome. And when you start adding that stuff onto your previously thought out shots, when you want a certain composition and you're paying attention to that composition and where that's actually going to fit in within your narrative or your scene of your video, then you can also start adding in movement to those shots. So you can start going from side to side, you can start going backwards and forwards without having to worry, oh damn, I don't have a gimbal, this isn't going to look good. Or without having to worry about, oh, I'm going to have to stabilize every single shot in Premiere Pro afterwards. You can actually do this, pretty much all of it, within your GoPro, so it saves you a ton of time. That's what I mean by this is really convenient, because you can save so much time with it, not only in the stabilization, but also within the user-friendly interface and how easy it is to switch between modes and save you a ton of time there as well. Okay, so those last 3 tips were kind of separate points. We're going to be bringing them all together in tip number 4 right now, which is to basically combine all of these things into how you are shooting each shot. So you basically want to be in the right settings for that shot and try and stay fairly consistent within your settings. If you're shooting most of your video at 2.7K at, for example, 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second, I would recommend staying within that so you're not constantly like messing around with resolutions the whole time in your edit, which is sometimes necessary, but you should try and avoid it just to like make your life easier and make you stay sane when you're editing. So combine those settings. Also combine how you are viewing your shots and treating this like a real big camera and putting that care into it, and also combining the movement. And then you can start, this is where the magic really happens, is that if you have that right moment of somebody doing something that you really want to capture that fits within your narrative of your travel video, and then also if you combine looking at that shot, looking at that scene in the way that you want to capture it. So thinking about the moment, thinking about also a couple of composition rules such as the rule of thirds, making sure everything's lined up, and then moving as smooth as you can to capture that shot in the right way. So moving left to right, it always suggests something. Moving forwards and backwards, it suggests something too. And if you line that up with the other 2 tips, that's when you start getting those awesome artistic cinematic shots with just your GoPro. The final thing we've got to think about is the color correction and the edit within your movie. There's certain ways that you can edit to give things a really cinematic feel, and there's certain ways you can edit that give things a totally cheesy, totally boring, totally kind of rubbish feel. Even if you have, and this is what kind of breaks my heart a lot of the time, even if you have amazing footage that's like super clean, the shots are awesome, you can really like kind of dumb it down and make it look really not very exciting in your edit if you do it in the wrong way. So you've really got to pay attention to the track that you're using. Does the music suit the scene? You've also got to be aware of the color and the color in each shot, and is it consistent? You can achieve cinematic looks with a GoPro by, as I said, filming in Pro Tune, which gives everything a flat feel, and then putting just a cinematic LUT on that footage. So you can find a ton of free LUTs online. A cinematic feel is like the orange and teal, so blue shadows or teal shadows and orange midtones and highlights. If you put a LUT on that in a subtle kind of way onto your footage, then that can be an easy way to just make people think twice. Is this GoPro footage or is this something else? Or like, is this something bigger? On to the bonus tip right now, which is a little bit exciting. The thing about GoPros, right, is that they're super, super wide. They have limitations, you know. It's not like you can achieve DSLR-looking shots with a GoPro because you can't get that depth of field. You can't zoom in to something and then maybe just get the foreground in focus and completely blur out the background and get that creative feel. You just can't do that with the GoPro. We can push it to the limits to try and get as much cinematic footage as we can, but ultimately you can't do those kinds of shots. But a little trick that you can do is to have your GoPro on its normal settings and put it on linear mode. And with the Hero 6, you can actually zoom in a little bit. So if you put it on linear mode, it's going to basically make it less wide. It's going to kind of crop in slightly and get rid of that kind of slight warping effect. And then if you zoom in a little bit more, you can make it look like it's not that typical wide GoPro angle, and you can make it look like something different that's slightly closer, slightly more cropped. And again, you can kind of start getting that variety. Another thing that you can that's a limitation of a GoPro is that if every single shot is a super wide angle, then it does limit you and people can kind of start guessing like, oh yeah, this is a GoPro video. But if you start playing with these settings too, you can start getting a variety. You can start actually getting closer to your subjects too, which is much needed if you're just shooting everything in wide. All right, guys, if you want to get more information straight into your inbox, be sure to click the link below and sign up to my newsletter. First thing I'm going to give you is the gear list, which is all of the gear that I use for my travel videos. And then after that, you're going to be getting daily tips about travel videos, about how you can improve your travel videos. Some of it's also about the lifestyle and how you can actually push yourself to travel a bit more to try and get these videos. It's all super interesting stuff, and I'll see you guys there in the email newsletter. Click that link below. All right, guys, keep filming. Have a great day. Bye-bye.